Good morning, everyone. We are just going to wait a few more minutes till about 9 o'clock to start today's webinar. I'll just fill the space until it's time, since it's sort of weird for all of you out there to be watching us and not saying anything. So now, my name's Stacia Kusieski, and I'm the Director of Outreach at the Ohio History Connection. Hope everybody's been having a great Ohio Local History Alliance annual meeting this year. This is the third webinar I've been able to host during this, and I know I certainly thank our staff at the Ohio History Connection who've done such a great job putting all this together. Betsy Hedler, Matt Schulich, Jenny Solomon, particularly. I know as a host, I'm in charge of the technical aspects of this. So I know they have made me feel very prepared for all of this. So it's been a fun experience to be able to sit in so many different sessions this year. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to pass it over to Deborah, who is the moderator for today's panel. Deborah?
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar presentation of the Legacy of Charity's Children, Discovering a Family Leadership in Dayton, Ohio. Our presenters this morning are Sherri Goudy and Patricia Smith Griffin. We are, as we get started, we are asking you to mute your, to go into mute and stop the video, so sessions and chat activities are being recorded. And we ask that all questions be submitted through the chat and the Q&A, and we will be addressing those questions toward the end of this morning's session. If you have any technical problems, you see at the end of the slide there an email that you can contact to help you resolve any kind of technical difficulties. So this morning, our presenters are Sherri Goudy, who is a freelance archivist, researcher, and writer. She works on behalf of various organizations in the Dayton area, including the Dayton Metro Library, and her most proud association is with Charity's Children Family Archives. She is also a fact checker and researcher at the Kettering Foundation. Sherri serves as a vice president of the Society of Ohio Archivists and is an active leader within the archival and information science field. Our next panelist will be Patricia Smith Griffin. She has a background in broadcasting and communication. Mrs. Griffin's career boasts an impressive 30-year track record of delivering compelling programming with women in mind. She has held broadcaster, on-air talent, and producer titles with WHIO Cox Broadcasting, WROU Dayton, Ohio, and American Urban Radio Networks, and in 1999 founded the Women's Radio Network. As an independent radio producer, Pat leads creative, marketing, and delivers to market pre-recorded and live show formats. Her highly praised show, Keeping Secrets, will be returning to the airwaves in a podcast formatted in 2021. Today's presentation, again, is the Legacy of Charity's Children, Discovering a Family's Leadership in Dayton, Ohio, from 1802 to 2020. Our panelists will be discussing uncovering the roots of the family and countless discoveries of community activism, perseverance, and survival. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Sherri Goudy. Good morning, Sherri.
Good morning. Thank you, Deborah, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you this fine Saturday morning. As Deborah said, I'm a researcher and archivist, and public history is really important to me. The work we do as public historians is definitely front and center in our society right now. People are turning to our institutions for spaces of understanding and community, and of course, for evidence from the past. Some are interested in their own stories, where they came from, who their ancestors were, what legacy their bloodline came from and leads to. Others want to examine more closely the broadened frames historians are examining, such as the 1619 Project or women's suffrage. You may ask why it's important to broaden the frame of suffrage. Well, as historian Martha Jones puts it, suffrage alone is too narrow a goal for the work Black women and women of color were pursuing. In order to understand what these women were fighting for, we must include the fight for full citizenship, or, as was the case for many Native women, recognition and respect for sovereignty, the fight for criminal legal reform and peonage, for representation, not just in policy, but in courtrooms and on juries, for justice and collective liberation, and for the ability to be seen as complete and complex human beings. When we begin to examine all the ways in which Black women were uniting, organizing clubs and associations, and speaking publicly about, we begin to see just how critical the vote was to them. It was a political voice, and it was political power. Black women's pursuit of political power in this country is not a new frontier. For decades, historians have questioned why the suffrage movement did not include more Black women. Some even hypothesize perhaps they weren't interested or they were preoccupied with other concerns. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. Historians just needed to know where to look. And now we see their activism and pursuits everywhere and front and center of the movement. Again, Martha Jones puts it best. These women are the vanguard of women's rights, of civil rights, of human rights, and the vanguard of our democracy. They always have been. This project with Pat is one of those stories. Julia Ann Galloway Higgins was a leader in Dayton, Ohio. She was an activist, a suffragist, a daughter, a mother, a wife. She descended from leaders, and she gave birth to new leaders. She inspired leaders. She inspires me. I learned about Julia Higgins, Pat's great-grandmother, while researching in 2005. I read one sentence about her in the Charles Austin collection at Wright State while doing my graduate work there. It led to years of digging to find out more, which eventually led to my meeting Pat in 2018. She and her family have been the protectors of their family's legacy, the community archives meticulously caring for the stories, the documents, and the artifacts of their ancestors. And this brings me to my final thought as I hand things over to Pat. As public historians, eager in this environment of social justice, we must be careful of the work we do and how we do it. We cannot think of this time as a short-term fad with prize projects and then return to the status quo. We must pledge to actively and daily combat supremacy that has been built into our institutions. We must realize that memory work is not a monopoly that only professional institutions can do. We know that institutions have historically centered their collecting, preserving, curating, documenting, and storytelling on the white and male stories in our communities. And this is part of the reason there's a lack of trust and a lack of collaboration between community archives and institutions. The story you are about to hear, preserved by the family from which it has been passed down, this story is the example that Yusuf Amawale described in his 2018 article titled, "We Already Are." This collection, a priceless family treasure, is proof that community archives are not an alternative to institutional archives. It's not waiting to be discovered. It is not other or marginal, but rather it is integral. And it already exists, and it has always been present. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Pat Smith Griffin.
Good morning. I am so excited to be with you this morning. I must start. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer. To my right is our Jewel. That is Mother Julia at the age of 15. The picture, I've been asked if I colorize this picture. No, this is how special she was in our family, that even at that age, and in the very early 1900s, they took the time and the effort to capture her in that space and time. And it's a picture that's one of our very prized possessions. So I will start by talking about Mother Julia, an activist, a suffragist, an advocate for women and women's rights, and a remarkable mother in our family tree. However, she stands on the shoulders of character and courage. And as the great-granddaughter of Charity Davis Caesar Brawdy, the die was cast. Thank you. Thank you so much again for the opportunity to continue this legacy of Charity's children. I am going to begin by sharing my screen. And if you hear me today yell for technical support, that would be my daughter, Jacqueline. So let's see if this is ready. Okay. Are we sharing? Great. Okay. I'm going to share with you just a sampling of the pictures and artifacts, many of which have not been seen outside our family. And it's for the purpose of telling an American story as only a family can. Oral and written histories authenticated by research and confirmed through family archives that were lovingly preserved for generations in postcards that detail our travels and adventures, in letters that chronicle life events, and then in pictures, in journals that share their innermost thoughts of their generation, that are filled with heartbreaks and triumphs, and those pictures of a Black family that were living well in the 1800s, but whose existence was still marred by America's unwillingness to live up to its creed. And then there are antiquities that were rescued from being lost, stolen, and strayed. So I come to you today with tangible realism to present just a snapshot of the journey of our African-American family. It is a story that my mother's children recite like the Lord's Prayer. In 1803, John Davis came from Louisville, Kentucky, with his infant daughter, Charity, to the Miami Valley that is Dayton, Ohio. Her mother, who is believed to have died of smallpox, was a full-blood Cherokee. And because of this nativity, Charity could not be enslaved. Now, this was a fact that was impressed upon us as part of our family story because it speaks to the importance of risk for cause. You know, that good trouble. Now, nothing more is known from our family oral or written history about John Davis after their arrival to Dayton. However, this is my current point of research, finding John Isaac Davis, a man who in 1800s valued the life and safety of a female child. Well, recently, I discovered a handwritten first account of Charity's life. Now, after months of speculation, while working on a prospective commemorative project for Julia Higgins, I discovered that the handwriting, comparable handwriting and matching the loose journal pages, that she was in fact the author, telling the story of her great-grandmother, the grandmother she knew well, the grandmother she loved and for a time lived with. These consistencies in our oral and written histories have been an invaluable asset, and they establish confidence in the reliability of the information. Her mother, Julia writes, was a Cherokee Indian squaw, having passed on, leaving the child who was freeborn by virtue of the nativity of the Negro, by the virtue of her nativity of her mother, to the care of her Negro father. Meet Mother Charity. She says, this little girl, Charity, grew up with the city of Dayton, and she married Mr. Caesar, a man who had children as big as she. Historian Charles Austin extensively researched our family. Now, pictured here is the original handwritten research. After careful analysis to get an understanding of his methodology, this research has confirmed and even inspired our own work. He links Charity to an 1820 census, and among free colored persons is an Isaac Davis, whose wife is Mary Johnston, and listed among the children is a female child, 14 to 26, that Austin concludes is Charity. We proceeded with this information because it coincides with what Mother Julia had written about Charity Davis as a child bride. She would have been around 14 when she was more or less betrothed to Randolph Caesar, and we find an official marriage license that's dated 1827. We presume that the marriage may have been made official because she was by that time legal age, and perhaps even because of Caesar's pending death. However, we have yet to find a death certificate for Randolph Caesar. Charity and Randolph Caesar had one child, Charlie Caesar, and Julia writes that he was the noted ice skater of his day. By the account of her great-grandmother, Charity Brodie, she was a widow before marrying John Brodie, who was a well-connected barber in the city. And I found it interesting that the word contracted was used. In the mid to late 1830s, there was a thriving Black community in Dayton, Ohio called Africatown. It was located in the Baumberger Park area. And among the homes and businesses in Africatown was the Paul Pry Resort, which encompassed a hotel, restaurant, tavern, bathhouse, barbers, and manicurists catering specifically to the city's Black residents and travelers that came through the Free Northwest Territory. Well, in February of 1841, a Black woman, a very light complexion, visited the resort. The town's pro-slavery white men, looking for a reason to assault the thriving community, asserted that this woman was white and that she should not be entertained by or with, quote unquote, the Negroes. Julia's writing gives evidence that the mob attack was plotted and planned in John Brodie's barbershop. And he was assured that no harm would come to him or anyone in his shop. So they gathered as many as they could fit, and they warned as many as who would listen. The Brodie brothers, Abraham and Ansa, and then fellow barbers, the Davis brothers, James and Joseph, who worked with John. The mob kept their word. However, on a cold, heartless night in February 1841, Africatown was looted and burned to the ground. The total population of Dayton at the time was just over 6,000. Only 326 of its residents were Black citizens. Those who survived left the city, and for decades, Dayton had few Black residents. But those who left, among those who left, were the Brodie brothers. Abraham and Ansa fled to Canada. And John Brodie, well, John Brodie was likely never the same. Julia writes that he vowed he could not stay in a place that, quote, treated his people this way. And while census reports show him living in the city,
for a while thereafter, and there were children born after that time. Julia writes that John Brodie eventually left Dayton, Ohio, to join his brothers in Canada. But she wouldn't go. Charity wouldn't go. She would not leave the only friends and family she knew. And so she stayed. And among those, Charity Brodie and the United Daughters of Zion founded the First Wesleyan Methodist Church. Train your eyes on this picture. It's faded, but if you train your eyes on it for a minute, you will see that to the left, that is the First Wesleyan Methodist Church, Dayton's mother church. And then to your right is 121 Short Wilkinson Street, for many years the home of Charity Brodie. And in later years, it was the rear of 620 South Perry, the home of Charles and Julia Higgins. She writes, out of smoke and ashes, the First Wesleyan Methodist Church was founded in 1842. The church, through the work of its members, became the hub of Dayton's Underground Railroad. The United Daughters of Zion, with Charity as a trustee, purchased that small patch of land upon which the church was built. And those women took in laundry for 50 to 75 cents a day. And I'm showing you the iron. This is Mother Charity's iron. And they successfully paid off that mortgage, gifted the land to the church, all while they comforted, sheltered, and shuttled fleeing slaves to freedom. As a freedom fighter, Mother Charity was a fire watcher. Julia's writing implies that in the months and even in the years after the 1841 mob attack, Charity would mount her horse at night, patrolling the streets of Dayton's Black community, and quotes her as saying, "Lest some of the belligerent whites in town burn us to our sleep, in our sleep." As a suffragist, C.C. Brodie is listed among the attendees of the Ain't I a Woman speech with Sojourner Truth in Akron, Ohio. March 2nd, 1899, the Dayton Daily News article on Auntie Brodie's death, we find that she was also a nurse. And the article also provides more clues in our search for John Isaac Davis. The article reports that she was one of the very few Native Africans in the country. This is an exciting revelation because it lends itself to the likelihood that her father, John Davis, is an African who survived the Middle Passage. And it also confirms her indigenous lineage that guaranteed her freedom. To the left is the handwritten eulogy of Charity Davis Caesar Brodie. It was delivered and signed by the pastor of First Wesleyan Methodist Church, the Reverend W.R.J. Clemens. It is here we learn that Charity lost her sight in the mid to late 1880s. It establishes that she left the city of Dayton for Chicago around 1892 with her youngest daughter, Katie. Reverend Clemens writes, "This affectionate child took the blind mother into her care and keeping, and tenderly and lovingly ministered to her comfort until her dying hour. This she did for 7 long years." The eulogy provides details of Charity's life in and love for Dayton, Ohio. Reverend Clemens writes, "On Sabbath morning, Sister Brodie felt the end was indeed near. And she began to give messages to her daughter to communicate to her many friends in Dayton to whom she never expected to meet again on earth. 'Tell them all,' she said, 'to be sure to meet me in heaven, for I am going to my Savior and heavenly home.' He writes, 'Oh, I'm going home to suffer and die no more. Be sure to tell them that I leave word that they meet me in the blessed world where Jesus is.' On Sabbath forenoon, she spent time singing a favorite song, the chorus of which is 'Climbing Up Zion Hill.' That was her last effort. The hour at 5 p.m., sweetly and peacefully, she fell asleep in death in the 98th year of age. Oh, we who yet live, may we strive by the grace of God to meet her on high. Amen and amen. It is signed by the Reverend W.R.J. Clemens. Charity gave birth to 6, perhaps 7 children. The child of Randolph Caesar, Charles Caesar, and the children of John Broddy, Julia Broddy Chittenden, Harriet and Martha Broddy, Catherine Broddy, and Adeline Broddy. And we also find that there was a baby Louisa Broddy that likely did not survive. We move to the next generation of the Chittendens. Julia Broddy Chittenden, our 3rd great-grandmother, is the daughter of John and Charity Davis Broddy and wife of James Chittenden. She's the mother of Mary Louisa. The Chittendens primarily lived in Cincinnati, and James is registered as a cook. When he registered for the Civil War draft, his occupation is listed as a cook. Their children, Mary Louisa, Margaret, Martha, Jesse, and William. Now, we didn't have a lot of information on Jesse and William, and so for a while, we believed that perhaps they had left the family, maybe even had lived as white. However, recently discovered letter that Julia wrote to her mother, Mary Louisa, requires a little bit more explanation. And then there is our dear Aunt Mattie Chittenden Stewart. Julia Broddy Chittenden was preceded in death by her husband, who is buried in Calvary Cemetery in Kettering, Ohio. The Dayton Daily News February 15th article on the death of Julia Broddy Chittenden informs us that she was Catholic and she died in the home of her daughter, Mattie Stewart. It's interesting that the funeral services were held at Sacred Heart Church. Our family oral history says that she was the first and one of the very few Blacks to have ever had a funeral mass there. And the fact that she was buried beside her husband in Kettering's Calvary Cemetery, a cemetery in that day that was reserved for whites, has caused us to question and maybe presume that perhaps James Chittenden may have been Caucasian. Mary Louisa Chittenden Galloway Taylor, our 2nd great-grandmother, is the daughter of James and Julia Broddy Chittenden. She is the mother of Julia Galloway Higgins and the wife of William Galloway. Mary Louisa and William Galloway, William was of North Carolina, married May 20th, 1873, and together they had just one child, Julia, who was born on December 29th, 1873. William Galloway died of consumption, that's tuberculosis, in the home of Charity Broddy when she was living at 60 Eaker Street on April 20th, 1874, when Julia was just 4 months old. The child would never know her father, and our family history has disclosed very little about his short-lived life until late one night. I decided to research one of our family's prized artifacts, the manumission papers. I never had much information on their origin, but I developed 2 theories. Perhaps they had been left behind with Charity and her work on the Underground Railroad. And the other theory begins with some deduction. Because here's what we know. We know that since 1802, the female members of our family have been free. And these papers are dated 1861. So either they were left behind in Charity's efforts on the Underground Railroad, or they belonged to a male member of the family. And after a little digging, initial evidence indicates, and I think I will be able to confirm with additional research, that these papers are associated with William Galloway's family, the Price family of North Carolina, who were given their freedom in Butler County on June 14th in 1861. Mary Louisa married again John Quincy, John Taylor, and together they had one child, John Quincy Taylor. Mary Louisa's obituary says the funeral was held in the home of Charles and Julia Higgins at 620 South Perry. It was conducted by a priest, Father J.N. Samuels, and a minister, the Reverend DeSoto Bass of First Wesleyan Church. Many Daytonians will know his name from the housing complex that is named for him in Dayton. Mary Louisa was blessed to enjoy in her lifetime 4 generations. And that brings us to the Higginses. Commitment, courage, and community service defined their existence. Charles and Julia Higgins, oh my, theirs is a love story that I must be invited back to share, okay? I'm already gonna put it out there. Their life endeavors, their commitment to the Dayton community, and their connection to the Dunbar family make them among the most fascinating couple on our family tree. Meet the Higginses. Charles Higgins was born in Crawfordsville, Indiana, and he lived in Dayton for 75 years. He attended Central High School. He was a whistler, singer, entertainer, executive secretary of the Fifth Street Y, WW1 secretary, YMCA secretary at Camp Stewart, Virginia, graduate of the Bone Break Theological Seminary, that is now the United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. He was assistant pastor and elder of the First Wesleyan Church for some 25 years. His best friend was Paul Lawrence Dunbar, and he was the executor of Dunbar's estate. For many years, he cared for Mother Dunbar, who dictated to him stories from her days in slavery. And our Julia, I gotta take a second and catch my breath, and I'm gonna run through all of this because an activist is an understatement. She was a suffragist, founding the Women's Christian Association, the Mother Holloway Home for Children, the Mary Scott Nursing Home, the Unique Study Club, the Sojourner Truth Civic Society, the Dunbar Club, a member of the Dayton, the Ohio, the National Federation of Colored Women's Clubs. And in the early 1900s, she helped establish the Montgomery County chapter of the Red Cross and is among the nation's first Red Cross nurses. During the First World War, she left her younger children in the care of her older children to serve as nurse with her husband at Camp Stewart, Virginia, where she was also the camp mother. Within our collection of archives are pictures from the front lines of the First World War, as well as letters to Charles and Julia from the soldiers they served. These are the Higginses' children. From left to right, Elder Rita Lee, evangelist and pastor at First Wesleyan Church, and responsible for bringing the Freedom Bell from the old church to its current location at 608 Graymont Avenue in Dayton. That is the bell that rang throughout the Miami Valley on December 31st, 1863 midnight to announce the promised emancipation of the slaves. Elder Lee fostered over 100 children in Dayton. Rosalie Higgins Duggar, master's degree educator in the Dayton school system for over 30 years, and mother to Betty Jane, remember that name. And then there is Charles Lawrence Dunbar Higgins, a tenor, professor of music at Westminster Choir School in Princeton, New Jersey, and Isabel Salome, poet and singer. And then there is my grandmother there on the end, Charleste, the poet and essayist and politician. More to come on Charleste. And then the center is their daughter, Eunice. Eunice Higgins Williams, with her husband, Reverend Herschel Williams, and sister Elder Rita Lee, established the first Alder Street Community Chapel in Dayton, ministering to hundreds of children for over 3 decades. The Higginses family Sundays were highly anticipated events. Each of the children you see pictured here were required to present to their family each Sunday a song, scripture, and poem. This was a coveted ticket. These events gathered all the siblings, husbands, and cousins together, and as I said, they were legendary. Charles and Julia in the center here are pictured during their WW1 service. Julia has written at the bottom of this picture, Secretary Langford on the left, Secretary Higgins on the right, Lily Rivera, and J.G. Higgins. She also writes at the bottom, I believe that says, Friend Harbor, Virginia. The Dayton Daily News article regarding Charles' death headlines him as the friend of the poet and states, quote, many of the country's noted Negroes were among his personal friends. It lists among them Booker T. Washington, Hallie Q. Brown, and we have letters from these and other dignitaries, W.E.B. Du Bois and others, confirming their friendship with Charles and Julia, as well as their shared commitment to uplifting our nation. The next generation are the Johnsons. The Johnsons are pictured here with their children and new son-in-law standing on the porch of the old castle on the hill. The Johnsons would be considered today a power couple. Featured in the 1929 Dayton Forum article, they are listed as among the city's most successful business couples. It noted Ernest Johnson as Dayton's first Black master plumber, and Charleste as a real estate investor assisting field-to-factory migrants, a published author and member of the Dayton and the Ohio Poets Roundtable. In the 1930s, the Johnsons moved from their Summit Street home to the old castle on the hill, formerly at 2603 Jerome Avenue. The castle was often visited by Black Renaissance writers like Langston Hughes and J.A. Rogers. Rogers featured Charleste in the Pittsburgh Courier in 1934, describing her as one of America's most lyrical poets and noting the old castle on the hill for its rare antiques and art objects. Take just a peek at the Johnson brothers, plumbing that became Ernest Johnson and Sons. I leave you with 12 generations of Daytonians, 10 in my family line, 12 in the Duggar family line. But I cannot end today's talk without introducing you to the keepers of our family treasures, the hands that are locked together in this picture. Are responsible for sustaining these archives and promoting our story as they undoubtedly were doing that day. This is our Charleste. This is the Charleste that I get for this generation. This is my first cousin. Good morning. And we just want to thank you for this opportunity to continue our legacy and to share our inspiring story of Charity's children. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia,
Thank you.
for this beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
Your pride in your family's legacy is so visible. And again, we thank you for sharing with us. There are a few questions.
Sure.
Andy Verhoff asked, was Reverend Clemens of the Clemens family of German Township, Dark County, was he part of that family?
I do not know. I know of Reverend Clemens from my grandmother's writing in first 100 years. When I discovered
the eulogy, I wasn't exactly sure because this eulogy was written in 1899, and it is, as I said, been lovingly preserved. However, the name at the bottom was kind of faded. And it was not until I made the correlation with my grandmother's book, First 100 Years, where she lists the ministers throughout the 100 years of the First Wesleyan Church, that I came to understand. I could make out the Clemens, but I couldn't make out the first part. So I don't know, he very well could be part of that Germantown family.
Also, Andy wants to know is if the Calvary Cemetery was a Catholic cemetery.
I believe it is. Most of our family is buried in Woodland Cemetery in Dayton. The Chittendens were buried there in Calvary, but mostly everyone is in Woodland. But that was a distinction. One of the things that we have found most interesting in doing Charity's story is the fact that she was living in Chicago with her daughter and came back from Chicago to Dayton for the funeral to be buried in Woodland. So that is also part of my search for John Davis, because if it was that important for her, that's an expensive proposition even today. So if it was that important for her to come from Chicago, for the body to be brought back to Dayton and buried there in Woodland, I'm thinking that this John Davis that was buried on Woodland Avenue in 1840 may be connected to her.
Do you have any other questions? That we have one question. Are you planning on publishing anything about your family, or have you already? This is from Sarah.
Yes, Sarah, I am planning on publishing. The work has been extensive. And one of the things that I have found in doing this is that I have not run into a lot of people who archive archivists who archive their own family things. And that is a little different process than when you're archiving someone else's things. So it goes a little slower, but I also have a tough time communicating to people the extent of the collection that these two women that are on the screen kept. And the way they kept these things require literally a piece by piece separation to ensure that you have not thrown out anything important. In my mother's things, in the middle of a magazine was a letter that Langston Hughes had written to Charleste. And in it are their personal exchanges as well as poems that Langston Hughes sent to Charleste for her opinion. So it is a painstaking process. Our dear cousin BJ passed just a few months back, just a few months short, 3 months short of her 100th birthday. And cousin BJ did not have any children, and she was literally our aunt. My mother's sisters lived in New York and Texas and various places. However, cousin BJ was right around the corner. So we were blessed to have that close relationship with her. And the archives that I have been collating now belong to her. There was this big, I call it the document exchange of 2002, where my mother and cousin Betty Jean found that Kinko's was open 24 hours. And so they had a friend. They said, my mother said, I've got a boyfriend on the midnight shift. And so they would go to Kinko's, I think it's on Ludlow in downtown Dayton, every night, Monday through Friday, and they would make copies of each other's archives So if I don't have an original and I have a copy, then I know that the original is in one or the other's archives. But I call it the Great Document Exchange of 2002.
Currently, are you the only family member continuing the legacy of preserving family history and archives? Are you joined with any other cousins?
I am not the only family member. My sister, Carolyn, in Dayton, Ohio, has quite a few archives. We share and scan, pictures and whatnot, so that what she has, I have, and vice versa. And then my cousin that just dried my tears, she as well it has been a blessing to be with her at this point in my life and to be able to spend her mother's last few months. We would take pictures. I would take pictures that I couldn't identify. I would take pictures to Aunt Eliza and ask her to, Aunt Eliza, who is this or who is that? And she would say, girl, I don't know. I was the youngest. I was the baby. I don't know who these people are. But we have the absolutely adorable story, because it was one day I showed her a picture of a little girl. And I said, Aunt Eliza, I don't know who this is. And she said, they woke me up. I said, what? She said, they woke me up and brought me outside and put this hat on me and set me on a horse to take a picture with the pony. So it was one of the most endearing experiences. The picture was her. And so we had a lot of fun with that.
Sherri, can you add to your story and your connection and relationship to Patricia and her family history?
Sure. As I talked about in my introduction, I got started working in public history while I was doing my master's degree, and was researching the club movement in Dayton and women's organizations, and was researching into what African American women were doing in Dayton at the time, that turn of the century, 1880s to early 1900s. And like I said, came across a couple statements about Hallie Q. Brown, and then this woman named Julia Higgins, who did some work with Hallie Q. Brown and was active with suffrage and other women's organizations, and never found anything else about her for so long. And then a couple of years ago, one of the organizations in Dayton that I was working with, the Dayton Women's Club, they knew my interest in finding out more about Julia and about Black women's clubs in Dayton and things like that. And she said, well, there's going to be an exhibit, the Skyscrapers exhibit, Bing Davis. Every year there are local artists who choose a skyscraper, someone who has reached for the sky and achieving something, and they do art pieces on them. And so there was an art piece done about Julia, and I got to meet Pat's family, and they introduced me to Pat via email, and I've been her research assistant ever since, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity, and I'm so glad that you presented today, Pat. That was such an amazing presentation. Thank you so much.
And I need to also say thank you to you, Sherri. You have been an inspiration, and there have been times when it's an interesting conversation that Sherri and I had to get to the point of being my research assistant. I was kind of tentative in asking her, but the truth of the matter was that at the point that I was at in my research, doggone it, I'd have to bring somebody else up to speed, and Sherri was there already. So we were able to hit the ground running. The article about Auntie Brodie is something that Sherri sent to me. I had been looking for it. Because I knew, as active as she had been in the city, that there had to have been a news article on her,
Couldn't find it. Couldn't find
Hey,
it.
Sherri, can you talk about the poster? Someone has noticed your SOA poster in the background. Yeah,
Yes, this is every year in October, SOA celebrates Archives Month. And this year we wanted to focus on, since it was the centennial of the 19th Amendment, focus on suffragists from Ohio. And because of the pandemic, there weren't a lot of submissions. And so one of the committee leaders that was working on the poster reached out to me, and I was so glad they did, because I was like, oh, let me ask Pat if I can have permission to share one of Julia's photos. And she sent me this beautiful photo of Julia. And it's so cool. Natalie pointed out to me that it almost looks like she's wearing a suffrage sash, the way that they designed the poster. But I was so excited, not only that she was included, but that she's front and center, just as her work in Dayton was.
and Patricia, someone has asked, uh, how do you share your family history and archives outside to others? How are you currently sharing this?
Currently, we have not shared. That was one of the things that made today's presentation so special for our family, is because you are seeing things that we have not shared outside of the family. The first couple of pages that you saw of Charity's eulogy, the manumission papers, certainly, these are things that have not been seen outside of our family. And currently, I don't have a plan to make them available, although I do understand the historical significance of them. I don't have a plan as of yet to make them available. And the other thing is that they're not mine. I'm the custodian for this generation, but these things are not mine. When people come and look at my home, I have been told that it looks like a museum. And one of the things that I say is that I was told one time that, you really got nice taste in, antiques. And well, these are not my things. I learned early on that whatever decor I was going to have, it was going to have to include and embrace these Charlotte's 50-year collection of antiques and artifacts. So they're not mine. I am the custodian for this generation. And these conversations I'll have to have with my children about how they would like to proceed forward.
Hi, Pat. I have a question, but I can't type it into the Q&A because of my panelist status. So I think Sherri sort of alluded to this at the beginning in her own opening remarks about sometimes a tension that can occur between archives, libraries, museums, and folks who are memory keepers for their own families or communities. And I was just wondering if you had any insight into that, but also anything that you want to share with us as museum and library professionals, because the words that I'm hearing from you are very similar to words I've heard from other folks who are the memory keepers for their families, communities, etc.
I would say that you are exactly spot on with that. My mother and cousin BJ were very careful about who they shared things with. A lot of trepidation even for me today in the things that I was sharing with you. Yeah, and my cousin was just saying her mother as well. And it is not as though this story has not been told. It comes with some degree of frustration as I tell this, and Sherri will attest to it, that we've had some, I get excited. So we've had some high level conversations. But these women have been telling the story.
These people have been preserving these artifacts for now well over 100 years. I am not the first person to tell this story. This is not the first time that they have pushed this agenda. So much so that there were members of their own family who told them to stop. It's not important. People don't care. Everybody's family does stuff like that. But I can hear the words of Emma Caroline ringing in my ears saying, no, our people are great. So they had this sense of responsibility, pride. They have attempted to share, show, but you know, Black Americans, our efforts and accomplishments, I sometimes say that we don the cloak of invisibility because our efforts in our own communities go unnoticed. And it seems to be sometimes unimportant to mainstream America. As far as sharing these things, oh, I'd love to. But I don't know. I need to know that they will be appreciated. I need to know that they will be retained so that our future generations can make the decisions on how they want to present it. But for my generation, I'm going to tell the story. I shared with you today just a couple of pictures of some of our family antiquities, and it is only a drop in the bucket of Charlette's collection. And as these things sometimes became lost, stolen, and strayed, my mother's heart would be breaking. And I would say to her, but Mama, the value is in the story. The value is in the story. It's not in the things, it's in the story. It's in John Davis falling in love with a Cherokee woman, having a baby and bringing the baby to Ohio. Why Ohio? It's Julia Galloway and her commitment. It is Julia Chittenden. And in her quiet generation, raising a grandchild that would be and do all of the things that Julia did. And the beauty of Julia's story is that her efforts lived on for generations. In founding the Mother Holloway Home for Children, well, my sister Carolyn she's recently retired. However, for over 40 years, she was a social worker. It was impressed upon us. My mother used to say that it's easy to love a child that's grown under your heart for 9 months, but you will be judged by your ability to love someone else's child. This is the legacy of these generations. So and I am often asked, why do you do this? You know, why do you care? I don't care about what those people did or how they lived. Well, I do it because it is who I am and I have no choice. And I'm going to leave you with this poem that my grandmother Charlette wrote. I don't know if it's titled, I'll just call it Dedication. And in the years to come, they will read of us today who have lived and loved and labored along life's pilgrim's way. May their hearts and hands ever strive to carry on the task long since begun when we are gone.
Yes. Thank you, Patricia. I have one last question. We only have 2 minutes left of our time, but I think this is an important question. How do you locate manumission papers when you are researching? The question says free Blacks, but how do you locate manumission papers when you're researching African Americans?
I would say that if your family hasn't saved them, then you're probably going to begin your search within county records. In the state of Ohio in 1804, and I think they re-upped in 1807, it was something called the Black Codes, where you were required to register. Any Black living in any county in Ohio had so many days upon arrival in Ohio to register with the county, showing your emancipation papers and certifying your freedom. So the best place for you to start is probably looking, if it's in Ohio, to look at the Black codes that were in the county. Now, Montgomery County did not save theirs. Sherri was only able to pull up about 4 or 5 pages of Xerox pages of Dayton's Black Code, but I know that that Xenia area, they do have their, and I believe that theirs are online, have been digitized, their Black codes. And so it will list the name of the resident and all of the people within their family.
Yeah, Natalie just piggybacked on that answer, Pat. The Xenia's, the Greene County Record Center is where you'd want to go for that kind of information.
Okay, we're at the very end of our hour. Thank you again this morning for for sharing your family history. It was wonderful. The comments have been that it is a wonderful presentation. And so with that, I will say goodbye and encourage everyone to continue throughout the day enjoying the presentations that are offered throughout today. So again, goodbye, be blessed, and have a great day today. Bye.
Thank you.